Alrighty guys, so next one is Unit 4, or the fourth one. This is on page 15, so it's photosynthesis and cellular respiration. So we talked about the biomolecules, we talked about the cells and organelles, and we talked about osmosis and diffusion. And so now we're going to talk about photosynthesis and cellular respiration, and I think it's important that we had to do those other ones because photosynthesis happens in an organelle that we talked about, cellular respiration, same thing, and then we also need to know about the diffusion and osmosis of the molecules that are needed for those two. Okay, so real quickly, the powerhouse energy organelle of the animal cell is the mighty mitochondria. This is where energy conversion happens inside of an animal cell. And actually it's inside of both cells, in all cells. Okay? Blank is the molecule that provides all the power to a cell, and that's ATP. Okay? So, the only difference between an animal cell and a plant cell, they both need the mitochondria. Y'all, I'm drawing the mitochondria really big. Okay, here's mitochondria. Okay, is that we animals need to take this glucose molecule and we need to get it in through the cell. Most likely through facilitated diffusion or active transport. Glucose is too big to just pass through the membrane. Okay, so remember, the mitochondria needs raw materials. It needs glucose, so it needs to be fed for it to make this ATP. And I like to think of ATP kind of like an Energizer battery, okay? That is the battery that you need to give you energy, okay? Now, plants, they've got that organelle. Looks like it has stacks of coins in it. So this is the chloroplast. And these are not drawn to scale, okay? So that actually gives the mitochondria the glucose. So both cells need the mitochondria because only the mitochondria makes the chemical potential energy that is ATP, okay? So it's only the mitochondria that makes the ATP, but they both need glucose. Animals have to eat the glucose. Plants make their own. Heterotrophs need to eat the glucose to feed their mitochondria. Autotrophs make it from the sun, okay? So let's move on. Here's a great representation of how the two processes work together, especially when it comes to plants and animals. Carbon cycle, oxygen cycle. So first off, the energy that always comes into any system, so what energy can fuel everything, that's going to be solar energy or energy from the sun, light energy. I'll just write the sun, okay? So the sun is going to feed into the process of photosynthesis. Okay, so I know photosynthesis is this top process, okay? The organelle that takes in the light is the chloroplast. And the organelle, like I just drew, it kind of is bean-shaped, but it has a whole bunch of these stacks. These are chlorophyll stacks, and the photons of light hit these chlorophyll stacks, excite them, and that's how we kind of make the glucose, okay? Now, this happens in plants, okay? So technically, I'm going to fill out the materials for photosynthesis, so the reactants and the products based on what I know about plants. So what do plants need? Well, they need sun, they need to be watered, and they need a gas. What gas do plants take in? CO2. Okay, so if I wrote this as a formula, I would write it out. H2O plus CO2 plus light energy, radiant energy, sun energy, whatever you want to say, yields. So what does that make? Well, plants make their own food, so they're making glucose, C6H12O6, okay? And the byproduct of this process is oxygen, okay? So when plants take the sun and the water and the CO2, they restructure it because look it's all CHO, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen. They need a couple of them and they restructure them into the C6H12O6, okay? And then oxygen is left off as a byproduct, okay? So now, who eats the glucose and takes in the oxygen? Animals. In our process, in the mitochondria, so technically I say animals, but really it's the mitochondria, cellular respiration, but you could think of it as plants and animals. That way you kind of, because I think cellular respiration is a little bit harder to think about. But remember, this can happen in plants too, because we're not just talking about plants and animals, we're talking about chloroplasts and mitochondria. So, in the process of cellular respiration, so cell respiration could be called cellular respiration. They could even call it just plain respiration, okay? So this is how we actually make our energy. So the end product is what kind of energy? We can call it ATP energy, or we could even call it chemical potential energy. Okay, so the mitochondria, or animals, takes in the oxygen, takes in the glucose, okay? The organelle is the mitochondria. It's that same bean shape as the chloroplast, but it has a whole bunch of different folds in it, okay? And when it takes in the oxygen and C6H12O6, it puts out water and CO2. So when I talk about plants versus animals, I think it's really easy to say in your head, okay, animals breathe in oxygen, they breathe out CO2. Animals eat and they have to urinate, they have to expel liquids, okay? So most of the questions that you're going to be asked in these chapters on these things, they're going to quiz you on if you know what goes into photosynthesis, what goes out, what goes into cellular respiration, what comes out. And a lot of the questions will say things like, the products of one are the reactants to the other. And the products of this one is the reactant, and that's true.